Ever notice how ads always pop up at the worst moments? When the killer's identity is about to be revealed. During that perfect meditation flow. On Amazon Music, we believe in keeping you in the moment. That's why we've got millions of ad-free podcast episodes, so you can stay completely immersed in every story, every reveal, every breath. Download the Amazon Music app and start listening to your favorite podcasts ad-free, included with Prime.
Start with a quote. And I feel like this one, it sets the stage for everything we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
It's from Russell Vought, the man we're focusing on. This came from some private recordings back around 2024. He said, quote, "We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work."
Wow. Yeah. Traumatically affected.
Right.
That's not, budget speak. That's not the language of a bean counter. That sounds like something a general would say before a siege.
It's so visceral. And that's exactly the point. If you heard that completely cold, you'd think it was from, I don't know, a radical fringe activist or something. But no, that's from the man who, as of today, Friday, January 16th, 2026, is the director of the Office of Management and Budget.
For the second time. He's been in that chair for almost a year now.
Yeah, I think we need to just pause on that title for a second. OMB director.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like possibly the most boring job in all of Washington, D.C.
It usually is. I mean, it's the land of spreadsheets and, telling the Secretary of Transportation they can't have new staplers. It's the no department.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be about math.
Right, the bean counter in chief. But our whole mission today, the entire point of this deep dive, is to show you that if you think Russ Vought is just doing math, you are missing the single biggest story of this administration.
He's not balancing the books. He's rewriting the entire operating system.
That's a great way to put it. The sources we've been digging into, his essays, especially from his time at the Center for Renewing America, biographical profiles, the leaked recordings, they all paint a picture of him as the intellectual architect of this entire administrative overhaul we're living through.
He is the philosophy. He is the engine. Vought isn't just looking to trim the deficit here and there. He is waging what he himself sees as a theological and ideological war.
A war.
Absolutely. He fundamentally believes we're in what he calls a post-constitutional moment. And his goal isn't reform. It's a complete dismantle and replace operation on the federal government as we know it.
So today, we're going to skip the day-to-day headlines. We're not going to talk about which specific program got its funding frozen this week.
Yeah, that's just the symptom.
Exactly. We want to look at the cause.
Yeah.
We're going to do a deep dive into Russ Vaught's mind. We want to understand how he thinks, why he thinks that way. We're going to trace his intellectual genealogy, from a blue-collar kid in Connecticut to the halls of evangelical Harvard.
All the way to this concept he champions called radical constitutionalism.
Right. Because if you want to understand the year 2026, you can't just look at the president. You have to understand the theology of power that is driving Russell Vought.
That's the key, the theology of power.
So let's go back. Let's rewind the tape.
Yeah.
Because this story, it doesn't start in a Washington think tank.
No, not at all. Vaught's origins are really important to his entire worldview. He grew up in Trumbull, Connecticut.
A very blue-collar town.
Very. His father was an electrician and a Marine. His mom was a school teacher. And Vought talks about this a lot. He sees his family as part of the forgotten class of Americans, the people who, work hard, play by the rules, but feel like the elites in power just look down on them.
But it's not just the class background. There was a specific event, a real turning point that rewired his entire family. It happened in 1981. Russ was only 4.
The car crash. It was a horrific tragedy. His father's daughter from a previous marriage, so Russ's half-sister, was killed in a car accident.
Unimaginable.
And that kind of sudden, senseless loss. I mean, it can just shatter a family. But for Vaught's father, it did the opposite. It triggered this incredibly intense, all-consuming religious awakening. The family's faith went from being, a part of their life to being the absolute center of their life.
And we're not talking about a casual go-to-church on Easter kind of faith, are we?
Oh, not even close. This was a faith that demanded total integration into every aspect of life. It's what led his mother to help launch a Christian school. They pulled away from the public system because they felt it wasn't aligned with their values.
And the curriculum at that school is, well, it's pretty revealing, isn't it?
It's the first breadcrumb. The curriculum taught a very specific concept. that all governmental power and authority come from God.
Okay, let's just stop and unpack that for a moment.
Yeah.
Because that's not what they teach you in a standard high school civics class.
Not at all.
We learn that power derives from the consent of the governed.
Right.
From we the people.
Right. And Vought wouldn't necessarily disagree with the mechanics of democracy, but in his worldview, there's a hierarchy. The state's authority isn't ultimate. It's delegated. The state is just a vessel, and its legitimacy is conditional.
Conditional on right.
On whether it's aligned with God's will and what he would call natural order. If that vessel, the government, becomes corrupted or actively works against that order, its claim to authority becomes illegitimate.
So that seed is planted very, very early on, this idea that the existing system, the status quo, isn't the highest power.
Precisely. And that intellectual and spiritual journey eventually leads him to Wheaton College in Illinois.
Which has a nickname, right? People call it the Evangelical Harvard.
They do, and it's earned. It's a very serious intellectual center for American evangelicalism. Billy Graham is an alum. It's not a place you go to just, coast on faith. It's academically rigorous.
And it's at Wheaton that we get this really interesting, almost humanizing glimpse of a younger Russ Vought. Because he wasn't the firebrand we see today. He was a bit of a nerd.
A massive nerd by all accounts.
I love this anecdote the sources bring up. The prank his dormmates played on him.
The dirty dish prank, yes.
Tell us about it. It says so much.
So the story goes that he was so bookish, so serious and intense, that his roommates decided they had to mess with him. They took a bin of just disgusting, festering, moldy dishes and hid it under his bed.
Just to see if they could get a rise out of him.
Oh, exactly. It paints a picture of someone who was maybe a little socially awkward. Definitely not the life of the party. He was there to work.
But he wasn't a total recluse.
Yeah.
He got involved in student government. He ran for student body vice president. And this is the part that's so fascinating. Given who he is now, you'd think his platform would be some grand moral crusade.
Right. Something about campus piety or whatever.
But it wasn't. His big issue was recycling.
Recycling?
He wanted to improve the campus recycling program. It seems so, so mundane in retrospect.
It does, but I actually think it fits the psychological profile.
How so?
It shows a guy who looks at a system, any system, even one for cans and bottles, and sees inefficiency and disorder. He has a compulsion to fix it, to organize it, to make it work the right way. The scale of the system he wants to fix has just gotten a lot bigger.
That's a great point. But the real intellectual shift, the move from recycler to revolutionary, seems to happen when he discovers the work of a certain German theologian.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Right. Now, most people know Bonhoeffer as the pastor who resisted the Nazis. He was executed for his role in a plot to assassinate Hitler. A true martyr.
He is. And when most people, especially in politics, invoke Bonhoeffer, it's usually about that ultimate act of resistance against pure evil. But Vought seems to have taken a different, more tactical lesson from him.
It's not just about martyrdom for Vought.
No. It's about the sin of passivity. Bonhoeffer's great argument was that Christians cannot simply retreat into a private spiritual faith while the world burns down around them. You can't just be a good person in your own heart, in your own home.
You have to act.
You have a moral duty to engage in the world, even the messy, ugly political world. For Bonhoeffer, and by extension for Vought, standing on the sidelines and just praying while an unjust system grinds on isn't just lazy, it's a form of complicity. It's a sin.
So this gives him a theological justification, almost a permission structure, for being aggressive.
It's a mandate for action. If you sincerely believe the system is not just flawed, but is actively working against God's order, you don't just write a polite letter to your congressman. You have a holy obligation to tear it down.
So he graduates, he's armed with this new theological framework, and he comes to Washington.
Yeah.
And he does what you're supposed to do. He joins the establishment.
He gets on the escalator. He works for Senator Phil Gramm for Mike Pence when he was a congressman. He eventually becomes the vice president of Heritage Action, which is the political arm of the Heritage Foundation. He was a creature of the conservative system.
But not a happy one.
Not at all. This is what you could call his period of early disillusionment. He's inside the machine, watching the Republican leadership that he's supposed to admire, and he's just disgusted.
There's that quote where he says he came to believe the GOP leadership was 95% wrong.
95%. I mean, that's not just a disagreement on tactics. That's a fundamental rejection.
So what was he seeing that made him so cynical?
He was seeing what he considered to be weakness and hypocrisy. He'd watch these leaders go on TV and give fiery speeches about fiscal responsibility and small government.
The standard playbook.
A standard playbook. And then, he says, they'd go into a back room, the lobbyists would come in, the pressure would be applied, and they'd vote for these gargantuan omnibus spending bills. They'd vote for corporate welfare. They'd fund the very agencies they promised to rein in.
So for him, it was all a show.
It was a charade. And he concluded that standard politics, the whole game of trying to win a few small cuts here and there, was a fool's errand. The system itself was the problem. It couldn't be reformed from within using the normal rules.
And this is where he makes the leap from being a frustrated staffer to being a political theorist. He develops a grand unifying theory of what's gone wrong.
He does. And the key text for this, the real Rosetta Stone to understanding Russ Vought and the entire current administration, is an essay he wrote in 2022. It was during the Biden years when he was out of power. It's called Renewing American Purpose.
If you read one thing to understand 2026, this is it.
This is it, because in this essay, he lays out his core diagnosis, which sounds, on its face, like a wild conspiracy theory. He says we are living in a post-constitutional moment.
What does he mean by that? That the Constitution is just gone?
Not literally, but he argues its authority is gone. And to explain this, he reaches back to a really interesting figure, Whittaker Chambers.
The ex-communist who became a huge voice for conservatism in the 1950s.
That's the one. Chambers talked about this idea of needing height, the ability to sort of float above the noise of daily politics and see the grand historical forces that are actually shaping events. Vought says if you get that height, you realize the Constitution we all learn about in school. It's not the one that's actually running the country anymore.
Which leads to his double government theory.
Exactly. He borrows the concept from a 19th century British writer, Walter Bagehot. Bagehot looked at the British system and said, listen, there are really two parts. There's the dignified part.
The Queen, the House of Lords.
Right. All the pomp and circumstance. They wear the crowns. They have the ceremonies. They look powerful, but they don't actually do anything. They're a symbol.
They're the show.
They're the show. And then Bagehot said, there's the efficient part. The cabinet, the House of Commons, the civil service. That's where the real power is. The boring stuff that actually runs the country.
Okay, so how does Vought map that onto America today?
This is the crucial move. Vought argues that in the 21st century United States, the president and the Congress, the people we elect, have become the dignified branch.
They've become the Queen.
They've become the Queen. They give speeches. They sign bills with a lot of pens. They argue on cable news. But in his view, they aren't actually in control. They're just window dressing for the real power.
And the efficient power, the real government, has been seized by the bureaucracy.
The permanent administrative state. The alphabet soup of agencies, DOJ, EPA, FBI, CDC, Department of Education. He believes these institutions now run the country on autopilot, guided by their own ideology, completely insulated from the will of the voters.
And this is where that phrase comes in, the one he helped popularize, the one we hear constantly now.
Woke and weaponized.
We have to stop on this.
Right.
Because it's so easy to dismiss that as just, a cable news catchphrase, a bumper sticker.
It is, but for Vought, it's a technical term. It's his core diagnosis of the disease.
So let's break it down. What does he mean by woke?
When he says woke, he's not just talking about, sensitivity training in the workplace, though he certainly despises that. He means that the entire permanent bureaucracy has been captured by a specific, progressive, secular ideology that he sees as fundamentally hostile to traditional American values, to Christianity, and to the original Constitution. It's a rival theology.
And weaponized.
Weaponized is the action. It means this bureaucracy is no longer neutral. It is actively using the immense power of the state, its regulatory power, its law enforcement power, to enforce its woke ideology and punish its political opponents.
So when he looks at, say, Dr. Anthony Fauci during the pandemic, he doesn't see a neutral public health expert trying to do his job.
No, he sees an agent of the regime. In his worldview, there's no such thing as a neutral expert in the permanent state. You are either an ally in restoring the true constitutional order, or you are part of the unwritten government that is strangling it. He literally calls the civil service an existential threat.
That language is everything, isn't it? If something is just bloated and inefficient, you try to reform it, you cut its budget by 10%.
But if it's an existential threat to the life of the nation...
You have to destroy it, you have to wage war on it.
Precisely. And this is the point where he makes a really surprising break. It's not just liberals he sees as the enemy. He has a huge beef with the conservative legal establishment.
You mean the Federalist Society?
The very same.
That's shocking. I mean, the Federalist Society is the gold standard for conservative lawyers.
Yeah.
They're the ones who supplied the list of judges for the Supreme Court. They are the conservative establishment.
And that's exactly Vaught's problem with them. This is one of the most fascinating parts of his worldview. He calls them a Praetorian Guard for the status quo.
A Praetorian Guard, like the emperor's bodyguards in ancient Rome.
Exactly. He's saying they exist to protect the current corrupt system, not to overthrow it. He argues they're obsessed with legal niceties and precedent and the proper process of law.
And for Vought, that's a problem because...
Why? Because he thinks they're bringing a law book to a knife fight. He sees the country burning down, being destroyed from within by this woke and weaponized regime, and the Federalist Society lawyers are over in the corner debating the finer points of administrative procedure.
They're conserving the post-constitutional order.
That's the charge. He thinks they're fiddling while Rome burns. For Vought, all that legal process is just, in his words, scar tissue.
Wow. Scar tissue.
It's such a vivid phrase. He means the last century of laws and Supreme Court precedents and civil service protections that have built up around the original Constitution. He doesn't want to gently massage the scar tissue. He wants to rip it off to get back to the raw bone of the original text.
And that brings us perfectly to his cure for all this. The diagnosis is post-constitutional America. The cure is what he calls radical constitutionalism.
Right, and we need to pay close attention to that word, radical. He chose it for a reason. This isn't your grandfather's conservative constitutionalism.
So let's get into the theology of this cure. He has openly embraced a label that, for a lot of people, is a pejorative. He calls himself a Christian nationalist.
He does, and we have to be really precise about what he means by that because the term gets thrown around so much. He actually wrote a piece for Newsweek defending the term. He said, quote, "I'm a Christian. I am a nationalist. We were meant to be a Christian nation."
Okay, but then you also read him saying he believes in the separation of church and state.
Mm.
So how do those two ideas possibly fit together?
It's a very specific and, to his mind, critical distinction. He argues for the institutional separation of church and state, meaning the government shouldn't appoint bishops and the Southern Baptist Convention shouldn't run the Department of Defense. There's no official state-sponsored church.
Okay.
But, and this is the whole game, he completely rejects the separation of Christian influence from the government. He believes the idea of a secular, neutral public square is a dangerous myth.
So what does that look like in practice? What's the actual difference?
The difference is about the ultimate source of authority. For Vought, our rights, our duties, the very concept of justice, it all comes from God, not from the state. The Declaration of Independence says we are endowed by our Creator with rights. Vought takes that literally.
So the state's job is just to recognize and protect those God-given rights.
Exactly. And for the state to be legitimate, it must operate in alignment with that divine natural order. So this isn't just about the hot-button culture war issues like abortion or LGBTQ rights, though he's absolutely on the traditionalist side of those. It's much deeper. It's about the very architecture of power.
So if you believe the president is the divinely ordained instrument to restore that natural order,
then a career civil servant at the EPA who's holding up a deregulation order by citing the Administrative Procedure Act isn't just being a stickler for the rules.
they are an obstacle to God's will.
In his framework, yes, they are an illegitimate barrier. They are violating the great hierarchy. And that connects directly to the legal theory that underpins his entire project, the unitary executive theory.
This is a big one. Let's break it down.
At its core, the theory is that Article 2 of the Constitution, which says the executive power shall be vested in a president, means exactly what it says. 100% of the executive power belongs to the president. All of it.
Which means the whole idea of an independent agency
Is a constitutional fiction. In Vaught's view, agencies like the Federal Reserve, the SEC, the FCC, even the Department of Justice and the FBI, they aren't independent. They can't be.
Why not?
Because every single person who works in the executive branch, from the Attorney General down to a mail clerk at the Department of Agriculture, works for the president. They are his hands. The president is the brain. If the brain tells the hands to do something, the hands don't get to say, no, sorry, my civil service protections say I don't have to.
So he wants to get rid of those protections.
He sees it as restoring the original design. And crucially, he didn't just dream this up when he got back into office. He spent the years between the Trump administrations building the weapons.
They had his think tank, the Center for Renewing America.
That's right. And while other think tanks in D.C. were, hosting panel discussions and writing op-eds, Vought's team was doing something far more practical. They were drafting the actual legal paperwork.
They were writing the executive orders.
Yeah.
The regulations, the legal memos to justify it all.
Yes. They were building a shadow government in waiting. They knew from their first term that if they relied on the career lawyers at the agencies to write the orders, to dismantle those same agencies, the lawyers would just slow walk everything. They'd tie them up in red tape.
So they did their homework in advance.
They did all the homework. They had the binders ready to go. So on day one, they didn't have to ask a lawyer, can we do this? They just opened the drawer, pulled out the order they wrote 2 years earlier and said, sign here.
Which brings us to today, to 2026.
Yeah.
We're seeing the how. We've talked about the why. Let's get into the specific mechanisms of this revolution.
Okay, so let's go back to that opening quote about trauma. That wasn't just him being hyperbolic. It is a deliberate tactic.
The strategy of trauma.
Yes. Vought believes the bureaucracy is an organism with its own culture, its own immune system. It instinctively resists threats and changes from the outside. So, to control it, you can't just reason with it. You have to break it psychologically.
So making them not want to go to work is about more than just low morale.
It's about creating an environment of total chaos and uncertainty, freezing funds so they can't do their jobs, announcing plans to eliminate their agency, threatening their pensions, moving their entire office from Washington, D.C. to, say, Kansas, forcing them to quit. It's about breaking the emotional and institutional hold these agencies have.
And the primary weapon for this is an executive order called Schedule F. We hear this term all the time now. For anyone listening who still isn't quite sure what it is, can you give us the simple breakdown?
Absolutely. So for more than a century, most federal civil servants have had job protections. They're hired based on merit, not politics, and you can't fire them just because a new president comes in and you don't like their perceived political views.
The idea being that you want the person who inspects our nuclear power plants to be an actual expert in nuclear engineering, not just the president's cousin.
Exactly. It's meant to ensure a baseline of competence and prevent a corrupt spoil system. But Vought and his allies see those protections as the armor of the deep state. It's what makes the bureaucracy unaccountable.
So Schedule F is the tool to pierce that armor.
It's the armor-piercing round. It's an executive order that reclassifies potentially tens of thousands of federal employees who have any role in making policy. It moves them out of the protected career service and into a new category, Schedule F.
Which makes them essentially political appointees.
It makes them at-will employees. Just like most people in the private sector, they can be fired at any time, for any reason, or for no reason at all.
So let's play that out. Say the president wants to open up a national forest for oil drilling, and a career scientist at the Interior Department writes a report saying this would be an ecological catastrophe.
Under the old system, that scientist is protected. They can't be fired for doing their job and presenting the facts. Under Schedule F, the political leadership can just say, "You're fired, get me a scientist who gives me the answer I want."
It removes all the friction from the system.
It removes all the brakes. Vought doesn't want neutral experts providing friction. He wants loyal foot soldiers executing the president's agenda. Full stop.
Okay, so that's the people. What about the money? There's this other arcane-sounding tool they're using, impoundment.
Right. This sounds like something out of a Dickens novel, but it's actually a throwback to the Nixon administration.
So what is it?
Impoundment is, simply put, the idea that even if Congress passes a law and appropriates money for a specific purpose, say $1 billion for a new public health initiative, the president can just refuse to spend it.
Just ignore Congress. I thought Congress had the power of the purse.
They do. And that's why, after Nixon tried to do this to kill programs he didn't like, Congress passed the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. That law explicitly makes it illegal for the president to substitute his own spending priorities for Congress's.
So what Vought is proposing is illegal.
He believes the law is unconstitutional. He argues the 1974 Act infringes on the president's core executive authority under Article 2. He's basically saying, sue us.
So he wants the president to deliberately break that law.
Yes. He wants to provoke a constitutional crisis. The plan is to simply stop sending money to the agencies and programs they despise, starve the EPA, defund public broadcasting, cut off grants for woke university programs, and force the issue to the Supreme Court, where he believes the current conservative majority would side with his view of the unitary executive.
It's just an astonishingly aggressive legal posture.
He believes the crisis is already upon us. In his view, this is just fighting back.
There's one more tool in the toolbox, though, and it feels like an even bigger escalation, the Insurrection Act.
This is a major one. During his time at the Center for Renewing America, Vaught's team spent a lot of time and energy exploring the domestic use of the U.S. military.
Which is normally forbidden,
right?
There's the Posse Comitatus Act.
Yes. Since the 1870s, it has been illegal to use the military for domestic law enforcement. But the Insurrection Act is the big historical exception. It gives the president the power to deploy troops on U.S. soil to suppress a rebellion or enforce the law.
And Vought sees a justification for using this now.
He does, specifically around the issue of immigration. His legal argument is that the situation at the southern border isn't just a policy challenge. It qualifies as an invasion under Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution.
That word invasion is doing a lot of legal work there.
It's everything. Because if it's legally defined as an invasion, then it's not a policing matter. It's a military matter. And the president, as commander-in-chief, has war powers.
Which would allow him to bypass all the normal legal constraints on immigration enforcement.
It could. It could mean deploying troops to detain people en masse, possibly without the usual due process. It all ties back to his core belief that the country is in a moment of existential crisis, a moment that rivals 1776 or 1860.
The Revolution or the Civil War.
And if you truly believe that, then deploying the military on your own soil doesn't seem like a radical step. It seems like a necessary one to save the republic.
It's all so heavy. And at the center of it all is the president. Now, let's be blunt. Donald Trump is not a theologian. He's not spending his evenings reading Bonhoeffer or Walter Bagehot.
No, he is not. And Vought is very clear-eyed about that. He's on record acknowledging that Trump is an imperfect instrument. He doesn't look to Trump for deep theological insights.
But he also calls Trump a gift of God. So how does he square that?
It's not about Trump's personal piety. Vought believes Trump is a gift for a very specific tactical reason. Trump has been, in Vaught's view, persecuted by the very same woke and weaponized system that Vought wants to destroy.
The investigations, the impeachments.
Exactly. Vaught's argument is that because the system attacked Trump personally, Trump gets it. He has seen the enemy up close. He understands what they're trying to do to the country because he experienced it firsthand.
So their goals are perfectly aligned, even if their motivations are different.
It's a perfect symbiosis. Trump has the populist energy, the connection with the voters, and the personal desire for retribution. Vought has the intellectual framework, the theological justification, and the step-by-step roadmap for a revolution. They need each other to succeed.
So as we bring this all together, where does it leave us? We started this deep dive by saying that Russell Vought is not some chaotic actor.
He's the opposite. He is intensely disciplined. He is methodical. That's what people miss, and that's what makes him so effective. He's not just breaking things for the sake of it. There is a theology, a legal theory, and a very detailed tactical plan behind every single move.
It feels like we are watching, in real time, a fundamental redefinition of American conservatism. This isn't the party of Ronald Reagan anymore.
It is a complete paradigm shift. The old Reaganite consensus was about limited government. It was about getting the state out of the way of the individual and the free market.
The government is the problem, not the solution.
Right. Vought doesn't believe that. He isn't afraid of state power. He wants to seize the heavy hand of the state, that's his phrase, and use it to actively crush his enemies and enforce a specific moral and political order. He doesn't want a smaller government. He wants a stronger, more ruthless government that's fighting for his side.
It's an unsettling picture, to say the least. Russell Vought genuinely believes that we are in a post-constitutional twilight, where the old rules, the old norms, the scar tissue of precedent, it all has to be torn away. He believes the house is on fire, and he's the only one with the axe to break down the doors.
And if his project, his radical constitutionalism, fully succeeds, what we're witnessing isn't just a change in policy. It's not like swapping out one tax plan for another. We are fundamentally altering the operating system of the American government. Power is being consolidated in the executive in a way that is unprecedented in our lifetimes.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. Vought and his allies argue that all of this, Schedule F, impoundment, the unitary executive, is a restoration, They claim they are returning us to the founders' original vision and saving the republic from a corrupt elite.
That is their sincere belief.
But if one person at the top has the power to fire anyone who disagrees with them, to ignore the laws and the budget passed by the people's elected representatives, and to command the military to enforce their will on domestic soil, are we really restoring a republic? Or are we installing a new kind of king?
I think that's the question for this entire decade.
Thanks for diving deep with us. Stay curious, stay well-informed, and we'll catch you on the next one.